Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unlocked, where we talk about unlocking the potential of you, the people you work with, and the people you do life with. At the time of this recording, I'm offering all of you, yes, my lovely listeners, a free 15-minute communication coaching call. You come with some kind of communication problem, and I give you a solution. My calendar link is in the show notes, so check that out. My friends, today, Skot Mackey is going to enlighten us and give us some hope. Hope is what we're all in need of pretty much all the time. Hope is what drives us, what motivates us, and to kind of keep us alive, keep us thriving in this space. Now, 2024 is an election year, and we're going to hear a lot of kind of negative stuff. Let's just be honest. That's what's going to happen because that's what happens in election years, and it gets pretty nasty out there. In the light of that, Skot has a new book coming out, or it's already out, depending on when you listen to this, February 6th, 2024. And it is called Love Is Not the Answer. And we talk about that book and about the ideas in that book in this interview. Let me introduce you to Skot. So Skot is, he's an author, community builder, entrepreneur, and he works at the nexus of what we call spirituality, politics, and social change. We talk about his bio a little bit at the beginning of the interview because of how interesting it is. He staffed presidential campaigns, in particular Obama's campaign. He's going to talk about that. He worked in foreign policy and he's ran tech startups. Now, he ran Obama's campaign, but his background is very not that. So you need to understand where he came from and his upbringing so you can understand where this interview is going to go. And this new book is about bridging some gaps. And what do we use to do that? How do we instill hope? What's our perspective in a period where it may be dark right now? And the uniqueness of this book, it's written like a novel. There's characters involved, and he wrote it, and he says at the end of the interview, he wrote it to entertain. And hopefully to have people start to think a little bit and to kind of nod their head. But at the end of the day, he is such, an approachable, warm, inviting person that he really just wants to entertain and bring some hope and light and some conversation to everything that we're doing here right now. So without further ado, we are going to talk to Skot. Here we come. What's up, Skot? It's good to see you, man.
Yeah. How's it going, Skot, with the K?
Skot with a C. Yes. Right. So it's not to get people too confused. So when you say my name, you need to say Skot, like pronounce the K so people don't get messed up, like think we're talking to each other.
All right.
So no, this is really cool talking to you. We were introduced through a mutual connection. You were on Deke Copenhaver's show, and he was like, Skot. He's like, you've got to have this dude on your show. Like, it was such a good interview, and you really gotta, you gotta talk to him because his brain is awesome. So that's why you're on my show, because Deke said you should be on my show, and Deke's awesome. And so I assume you're awesome.
Yeah. Well, one, thank you. And two, Deke is just the man in every way, like an incredibly kind and thoughtful human. So I appreciate him introducing you as well, because he has very good things to say.
Very cool. That's super nice of him. Hey, I want to talk about your bio real quick. Like, you have this, the first line, like, I loved it. I read it and I highlighted it because I was just going, what? Skot is a fun-loving, fairly, and you put fairly in quotes. Yeah. Fairly eccentric author, community builder, entrepreneur, working at the nexus of spirituality, politics, and social change. I don't read bios that look like that, man. So what's that about?
Yeah, well, thank you, I think. And you can thank the fairly eccentric part for my, that was from my fiance, who was trying to capture some of my, weirdness, for lack of a better word, in an acceptable way. But yeah, I've had, I don't know, feels normal to me, but maybe an odd background in the grand scheme of things. So I grew up initially as a missionary kid. So parents who had, truly committed their life to the faith and to service. But that path brought them to rural East Texas. So I grew up in a town of, 2,000 people, halfway between Dallas and Shreveport. So like one, those people are my people when it comes down to it. And two, have, really maintained a lot of relationships and connections with folks in that world, even as my politics changed dramatically. So, grew up a Republican kid in rural East Texas, no shock there. But, by the time I was graduating college, I was obsessed with Barack Obama, as a lot of 22-year-olds were in 2008. And I was on his campaign all of that year. So that in a lot of ways, there's a dichotomy that exists there between growing up conservative, rural, and Christian. And then for me was, I left the faith for many years, but, then have this entire piece of life that was politics, Washington, D.C., working in foreign policy, spending time in Afghanistan. And eventually, really because I didn't necessarily like who I was becoming when I looked in the mirror in my early 30s, rediscovering God and discovering one, a real spirit led faith and relationship there. But two, also the power that, any person has. And it certainly changed my life to, a therapy approach to understanding our emotions and beginning to understand how our psyche works, the connection between our conscious and subconscious mind, and how not only we can heal and change, but also how those same principles can be applied more broadly to society, to politics, and I think to any organization as well. How's that?
Okay, so that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Just to make sure that Republicans don't immediately hang up on this call, right? That they don't stop this thing altogether. Be like, this dude's a traitor. This guy was part of the faith, and now he went to Barack Obama's side. No, we lost one. For fear of every Republican having that reaction and turning this tape off right now, why should they keep listening to what we're about to say?
Few quick answers. One, during my second stint in Washington, D.C., so this will be don't turn it off right when I say this, but I was hired by the Open Society Foundation, so that's George Soros's org, to build an organization for them. But it was a very odd project for them, and it's why they chose me in the end, is that it was a bipartisan or nonpartisan effort focused on Afghanistan policy. So I, from 2013 through 15, found myself in this very odd position where one day I might be going up to Congress or Capitol Hill with Center for American Progress and the Feminist Majority Foundation, very liberal organizations. But then the next day I might be doing the exact same thing with the Heritage Foundation and American Enterprise Institute, very conservative organizations many of your listeners might be familiar with. And so, my unique background, which was coming from rural Texas before getting plugged into the, wild liberal world of Barack Obama, really in the end has just allowed me to see, to understand, and to be able to humanize individuals who sit in both political parties and maybe sit on different sides of what right now often feels like an insurmountable divide. But what I think is important for me, and probably for a lot of us in this country, is, when we start talking to each other and we get past the labels we give ourselves or the labels we give those we disagree with or we might think are the enemy, we find that, there's a human sitting underneath, and we all not only have a lot of similarities, but are very similar when it comes down to it. And so that sort of idea, and for me, that often looks like it's a lot of work that I've done, but learning to live from a place of love and compassion as consistently as often as possible, I think lets me be not the enemy to your Republican listeners, if they're still here.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure they are. And that's what I think I love about my listeners, is that they do come from all different aspects of life, and politics and viewpoints. And my own personal experience, I too grew up in a very conservative household. Rush Limbaugh was on the radio all the time. Sean Hannity, Fox News was part of our daily gospel, right? And that's how we rode that train, and family still does, and totally fine. And I can agree and feel that there's pieces of that I can hold on to. In about 2002/3, we moved up to Chicago. I got a job up there to work at a global design firm. And so I worked up there. And in the midst of the art community in which I was part of, not very conservative for the most part, pretty liberal in many aspects of the way they did things and thought about things, um, as artists tend to be. And so in the creative field that I was, I was around a lot of, liberal ideas and talking about those ideas and bringing my conservative background to the conversation, where I was immediately labeled as a Bush lover. Like, oh, here comes Skot, the Bush lover. Like, and I was like, no, I'm not. I don't necessarily love Bush. I'm just throwing out an idea. Like, what about this? And then, I would go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden I'm labeled as an Obama lover. Like, it was I couldn't win. I don't know whether I was in Chicago or whether I was in Atlanta. I could not win. I was labeled as this just because I'm arguing the other side. Were you ever in that boat? Were you ever kind of like, you traitor, like, what are you doing? What side are you on here, Skot? Like, I don't know who you are anymore. Like, what's going on?
I've gotten that in so many different ways over the years. Just like starting at home with my dad to a strong degree. Although, when I went and worked for President Obama, well, wasn't president yet, but like Obama the first time in 2008, like my dad and I had come to loggerheads over enough issues at that point where it probably wasn't an enormous shock. But, he was very confused to find he had his oldest son now working for Barack Obama. And when his friends in Van, Texas asked him what Skot was up to, he had to deliver that news. It was miserable for him. But, like immediately after the campaign, I went home and I didn't feel like I was naive, right? I didn't feel like I had done anything that extreme, but I found that a lot of my friends or, teachers or older individuals who were family friends that I knew, like did not know what to make of me anymore. And I really, I put in a lot of time, call it like rebuilding relationships or recalibrating relationships to kind of reestablish that like, hey, I am the same guy. My values or my view of the world might be different than what it was growing up or what like the view that you have right now and the view you assume that I have or had, but still here. And there's, different versions of that. When the, in 2010 in DC, when, all things like right wing were blowing up, like Tea Party stuff, I often found myself in a very similar position to you, where like people were saying all these terrible things about Tea Party members and right wingers this and right wingers that. And, I felt a lot of that politically, like frustration. But at the same time, those were my friends and the people I grew up with, who they were talking about. And I knew those individuals and I knew their heart. And even if things that they did might infuriate me, and beliefs that they had, I often would believe were entirely wrong, I still knew those humans and thought they were great people. And so like would end up in very similar situations where, with all of my very liberal kind of Obama campaign friends would be defending Tea Party members. And it was always a very odd thing. In 2016, I thought Donald Trump was going to win and really pissed a lot of my friends off. And then he did. And it was like, oh, why did you think that? So yeah, interesting conversations.
It is. It is. Let's talk a little bit about 2024. It's a political year. Well, a lot of years are political years. Election year, I guess I'll label it that to be more specific. And for some, it feels a bit dark and gloomy. It feels a bit like, though I don't know whether it's the political process that people feel dark and gloomy about, or now I'm going to start getting text messages from people that I don't want to get text messages from, or whatever it is, or maybe
Right.
just the outlook of what's going to happen in the future, because they don't feel a lot of hope here or a lot of hope there, whatever side of the aisle you are on. Is it just about politics, you think? Is there something else there, like boiling at the surface? Like what's the deal?
Yeah. It's a great question. So when I was like really started grappling with these questions a couple years ago, not knowing an answer to these questions, I And there's like very specific ways that this happened. Like I ended up writing a book about it. I was like, I'm going to try to fictionalize a response. Just how I've ended up writing a novel called Love Is Not the Answer, which we might get into later, but it's a humorous allegory trying to explain the environment that we find ourselves in right now. But, more to the point, I think one, it is politics. It's a huge part of like why we all feel so bad, why there's this like immense frustration that exists in both political parties and across the country. But I don't think the problem is how we frame it oftentimes. So like I think one enormous issue is that from top to bottom of our society, people have this strong sense that they don't necessarily know what to do with, but they feel our systems are not working for us anymore. That our systems are built to serve themselves. And that is true whether people are thinking about our political systems, are thinking about how our political systems are bought and paid for by corporate money. If you're talking with folks on the right, it's my former funder, George Soros. And if you're talking to folks on the left, it's corporations and the Koch brothers. But we all believe our systems are bought and paid for. It's true if you look at our economic systems, inequality as measured has been increasing since the 80s, but it's skyrocketed over the last several years. People feel that when you see some winning, but most folks aren't. You stop feeling like you're in the same boat and pulling together. And so one problem is that we've lost trust or faith in the systems that we feel dictating our lives, and we don't know what to do with them. And so that's one purpose in my book, in writing a book that is in a lot of ways an allegory, is to try and help explain exactly how these large business and economic, or like business and political and media systems, are working together and not necessarily for us, like for you, Skot with a K, or for me, Skot with a C. But then I think the second piece of that puzzle is we don't have a great story about ourselves as America or the American people right now. And so you do a lot of work, I think, with individuals working on their purpose. And I think we have this enormous challenge as a nation right now, is like, what is our purpose? Are we the good guys or are we the bad guys? What are we pulling for? Why are we here? And short of having a uniting narrative that we can gather and pull around, or we can gather and organize around, we are left pursuing our own ends, or like flailing in a lot of ways, trying to figure out what it is that we're for. And so we have this like discontent and a lack of faith in our systems that we think aren't working for us. We don't know what we're doing to a larger degree, so we don't know how to organize and relate to our neighbors, which then creates a scenario of just enormous discontent. And the way our political systems are built and the way politicians are incentivized, we want to capitalize on that discontent by like riling people up so we can raise money, and dividing folks and like pitting them against each other so that we can win elections. And so we have this really negative, dark soup right now that we need to figure out what to do with, or how to make sense of.
It is dark. And I'll reference our mutual friend, Deke Copenhaver, who is not a dark individual whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, winning elections off of positivity and hope, as opposed to smear campaigns and negative ads and all kinds of, like, he didn't run any of that stuff. And won, his elections that way. And so, talking to people like that, I do get some hope. I sit there and go, so there are people out there that can do it differently in a way that is helping bridge it a little bit better. And if the statistics all say, and the polls all say, that people want more bipartisan agreement and collaboration, but it wouldn't seem that way when you look at it,
It only feels that way if you look at the polls. It never feels that way if you're looking at, a political debate on TV, or listening to politicians talk about themselves, or certainly reading anything you see on social media. But like a couple quick points. One, this is not the first time the U.S. Has been in what feels like a very dark place. So this is not necessarily a unique moment from a historic perspective. Two, I think there's enormous number of reasons for hope. And the hope that I find for the most part is in people. It's in the conversations you and I have. It's in the conversations I have with friends when I do go back to East Texas, and I'm like, oh yeah, we really disagree and we still really like each other. It's in an enormous number of conversations and organizations that are working on these issues that you just talked about right now. But when it comes down to it, and what gives me the most hope is that we have found ourselves in what I feel to be a place where we have become very separated. We often find we're separated from ourselves because we are perhaps not given the emotional skills or expertise to really understand our own experience of life and how we can take control of it. We end up then feeling the same way towards our neighbors, maybe feel the same way towards the natural earth that we're a part of. We feel very separated. So there's then an answer on the other end, which is connection. And I think so much of that connection can happen, one, through individual efforts. So the work you do to help someone in business find their purpose and have a better sense of themselves then enables that individual to be better to themselves, to their family, and their community around them. And I think there's this enormous raising awareness of, sometimes shows up as therapeutic language, beginning to understand how and why we are. Sometimes will show up in spiritual language, understanding how and why we are. But anyone who gets on that path becomes a person that is better able to not just relate to themselves, but better able to relate to the world around them from a compassionate perspective as well. And I see that happening everywhere in my life, and have been so pleasantly surprised as this book is beginning to come out, the relationships I'm able to build having those sorts of conversations. But the second piece is there's so much discontent in the nation. It shows up as anger and disrespect in public discourse a lot of times, which feels really poor. But that's also an opportunity for a leader or a set of leaders or for a movement to walk into that discontent, to tell a new story, to inspire in a new sort of way, and to help people walk in a different direction, right? So it's almost impossible to attribute this because it has been said so many different ways, but we become what we fight. So right now we are in this like winner take all, victory or defeat perspective within society. And what we largely are doing are we're fighting each other. But even if you win a battle when you're fighting within the energy of our systems that as they exist, you still lose because we've taken on the energy of these systems that are pitting us against each other to win. And so in the end, even if you win, you lose. I think what's beautiful and what's exciting is of all these leaders that are actively beginning to try and create alternatives. So my whole thing is I don't want to fight the systems or the people that exist. I want to work towards a different or a new kind of future by creating alternatives that people can opt into. So I'm not against the Democrats. I'm not against the Republicans. I'm for this. I'm for us. I'm for you. I'm for this different type of political or electoral solution set. And that takes this energy of being against and feeling helpless. And then it lets any individual or us collectively take responsibility and begin to think that we're in control. There's an enormous amount of power in choosing to be in control and choosing to take responsibility. And that's true in an individual life or an individual person's life. I don't like my existence. I'm going to take control of finding solutions so that I experience reality differently. Anyone can heal or change or grow by making that decision. And that's also true for us collectively. We just have to figure out how to do it.
Love is not the answer is interesting to me because I'm looking at it at the book cover itself. And by the time this episode is out, it will have launched. So everybody can get their copy. But it's got less melting hard on the cover, right? It's like this, and I will say that the liberals get labeled as the bleeding hearts of the political space, and try to do everything for everybody and give to this and give it. And so when you take this standpoint, and I want to talk about how you wrote the book, because it's not just like a commentary on politics. It is literally this idea of it's like a fable. I don't know if it's just like this story with these characters in it that are taught. And can you introduce us to the characters in this thing? Because you set them up at the beginning of the book, and they all have these you kind of introduce them kind of punchy at the beginning. They're all going through different experiences, and we're getting a wide spectrum of individuals here. So I want to know, from my standpoint, reading the intro pages that I have, I want to know why you picked those characters? Like, what was it about them?
Yeah. All right. So I'll set the book up with an incredibly brief synopsis. So the book is called Love is Not the Answer. And the tagline is when the power of love threatens to reform the two-party political system, the war on love begins. So give nothing away of the book itself, but it is an interesting and unusual read. So the characters themselves. So my main protagonist is an aging mystic named Julia Connor. She gardens. She's a beekeeper. She opted out of the real world years ago because she wanted to create an alternative for herself and her community, which for her looked like moving to a farm, praying a lot, keeping bees, etc. And then, she's a love obsessed mystic as well, and an author who mostly writes poetry and books about the heart. She also is, call it a pioneer, using psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, to work with and treat veterans who have PTSD. So she has this deep grounding working with some of the most wounded individuals on earth and helping them to heal. And not healing them herself, but by giving them the tools to see themselves in a different way, and an understanding that if you go back into your past, into your deepest wounds and the deepest part of your trauma, that it's actually by going back and experiencing it, by loving this thing that's been stuck inside of you, had nowhere to go, that you release it and let it leave. So like Julia's a little bit of a saint, and she's really the only saint in this entire novel when it comes down to it. So it's Julia, her veterans, and then they get discovered by a TikTok influencer who's kind of one of those like kind of angry, angsty kids who's like burning people on TikTok and social media, although we call the platform Beep Beep in the book. So she initially tries to like embarrass Julia around Julia's new book, which is called Love and Compassion, a call for spiritual and political revival. But instead of burning her, she kind of becomes obsessed with Julia and these like gruff, super emotionally in tune veterans, right? So they become the heart of what in the book is the love vote. Then on the other side, you have individuals who are working within different large systems. So the Republican story is largely told through a character named Luke Lockwood, who's the campaign manager for the Republican presidential candidate. Luke is an evangelical Christian and the protege of the pastor of the largest megachurch in the nation. On the Democratic side, it's told through the campaign manager for the Democratic candidate. His name is Bradley Bishkoff. Apparently I had to alliterate. And both of them, what you find out as you're going through the story, are really good people. But they also, because of the incentives that exist within our political system, are forced to do things or make decisions or act in a way that we might look at from the outside and think is like bad or wrong. But it's really making this case and a larger case that I think we're a nation to a large degree of really good people responding to the incentives in our systems that encourage us to behave poorly or disrespectfully or similar. There are quite a few other characters as well. That might be enough of a setup, though.
No, it is. And at the beginning, they all like get into it really, really early on. I mean, you can tell. Uh, is it Mel P? Is that
Mel
who it is?
P.
What
Yeah.
Mel P? Yeah, Mel P is definitely trying to ruffle the feathers, in there a bit. And but when you get some of the first comments right out of the gate from Julia saying things like, "Hey, we just need some more love. We need some more compassion," and then Mel P's like what is that, and just kind of throwing it in the garbage and just like, so you're setting it up that way, but then love is not the answer. Tell us, like, why did you write it? Like, why is that the emphasis of, hey, let's throw out, we have this woman that's all about this love, compassion, self-service of who am I deep down and how do we bridge these gaps? And then you have this angsty teenager that is taking this other side. And then your book's called Love is Not the Answer. So what is it?
These are great questions, Skot. So love is not the answer because that eventually in the book becomes the rallying cry of those who oppose Julia Connor and the love vote, but also because I thought it would get people's attention on the cover of the book itself and at least earn a second look. That's the entirety of the logic there. So I'm going to define a few terms really quickly. So love is one word in the English language that means an enormous number of different things. I will avoid trying to define what my love for you because you're a human that I like versus my love for a friend I've had since birth versus my love for my fiance versus the love I have for my parents versus the love one has when you feel like divine love coursing through you. Those are all radically different things. So maybe we just define love as the force or power that calls us to a highest or a best version of ourselves. Then healing is also talked a lot about in the novel. And we'll just define healing as any person's, potentially any society as well, but any person's ability to heal the wounds that lurk in their heart, where they've been hurt, pieces of their past that are still within them, and cause them to act or to experience reality right now in a way that they wish was not so. So there's love, there's healing. There's like, well, how does that apply to politics? And it may or may not be obvious, but my sense is that politics, the systems of a nation, politics reflects society, and society reflects people within it. So I think to a large degree, we live in a society where ideas about healing, where the practical, powerful applications of love to ourselves or in our community or to the nation are ignored. And so we're going to have politics in a political system that also does not reflect those highest powers or the highest version of ourself. So in a book, I talk a lot about love. There is the evangelical church's conception of love. There is a new age conception of love. There are romantic conceptions of love. We use love all these different ways, but what love always is powerful. And I think we live at a time where we don't think about love as having much real world application. One of my arguments would be that love or compassion or concepts of healing actually have enormous real world applications, because if we learn how to channel those things and facilitate, the active existence of those in our own life, that will then by default change how we begin communicating with and interacting with each other as well.
But is politics really a place for that?
I don't know. I would answer yes, certainly. So here's the thing. Politics is a fight, right? So if politics is collective decision making, politics is an amazing apparatus that when we disagree with the neighbor or the next village over or the next state over, instead of marching over with pitchforks or, in modern parlance, maybe our AR-15s, we have these mechanisms that we can solve our problems. So politics is always going to be about how we solve conflict and disagreements. But we can have conflict or we can disagree in so many different ways. And if we live from a place where we, learn to actually have love and acceptance for ourselves, and we maintain the ability to see the same thing in our neighbors or in those we disagree with, how we do conflict and how we disagree can look very, very different than it does right now. And so if we can change our own lives or we can change how we relate to a neighbor, we can also change how we govern our nation.
I love that. So you're saying it starts with me. It starts with my own deep understanding of who I am, what I'm about, my ability to, love myself and appreciate who I am and the things I bring, the value that I have here. And from that, and if we reverse engineer what you were saying, that the people in it, the more love and self-acceptance and appreciation for who we are builds, that reflects in society, which then impacts politics.
Absolutely. And I do some work that is similar to yours in that, I have a variety of, call it clients that I call it facilitated inner work, right? But as you know, when you get beneath the surface, we have so many doubts. We have such negative self-talk. We are often so unable to self-facilitate or generate the love that we need, which we then go seeking outside in a job title or in success or things that we need from our romantic partner. So that really limits our own personal ability, right? Our own personal capacity to exist in the world in the way we wish we could. But a second related point is, yeah, like there's a piece of personal responsibility for ourselves, also for our nation. But the book, like I worked in politics for a long time. I have this real practical angle as well. So like, yeah, like our systems reflect society, but we can also make systemic changes that are going to incentivize different types of behavior. And so that's a point I really try to make throughout the book. It's fictional, but that we have to reform our systems as they exist. And my contention is that it's not actually that hard. Like there's already an enormous amount of public support for changing our electoral systems, for creating space for independent, call it like third party voices that don't reflect either of the, I think, very limiting party lines that exist right now. And there's two ways that we can do that. One is through a version of campaign finance reform, but how we fund our politics right now is legalize corruption in every way. How our politicians make money when they leave office is legalize corruption in every way. When you can give unlimited donations to a PAC or super PAC that might be anonymous publicly, but that the elected official who that PAC is working on behalf of will always know about with a wink wink deal, that is corruption. We have a presidential candidate right now who was our ambassador to the United Nations. She and her family had financial troubles. We've all been there. She leaves office for several years, makes $8 or $10 million sitting on corporate boards and giving paid speeches, and then comes back to run for office again, right? Like the question with any of us is like, we work for who cuts our checks. It's really clear how the system that we've set up incentivizes our politicians from both parties not to work for you or for me or for your listeners, but to work for themselves and for those who cut their checks, right? So there's like a campaign finance piece. And then I think the second important piece is we have a two-party system, and our broader electoral system is set up to maintain this duopoly. So I think it's very important that we decide as a people that we're going to break that. And there are a variety of ways to do it. One is through open primaries, and others through ranked choice voting. I think term limits are important. My favorite is something called proportional representation. But right now we have a winner-take-all system of elections. Proportional representation basically says instead of having one congressional district where you're voting for two candidates, let's link together, call it 10 congressional districts. So if you have one congressional district and I'm running as an independent or I'm trying to start a third party and I get 20% of the vote, that's really impressive. But if I get 20% of the vote in one congressional district, that's going to leave me with 0% representation in Washington, D.C. With proportional representation, if I get 20% of the vote over this like 10-seat congressional district, then I'm going to have two of those 10 seats. So for the 20% of public opinion that is behind my values and what I'm representing, I'm going to then get 20% of the voice in our federal system. For me, that is brilliant, and that solves so many of our problems. And so if you like intentionally try to get money out of politics and then you make it a lot harder within our electoral laws for corporate voices or wealthy voices or special interests to effectively buy these systems that we're within, we do so much to disincentivize the really bad behavior that we see from our elected officials right now.
And another thing that's quite ridiculous is that we have put the power of changing those rules into the hands of the people whom it would not serve to have that type of system. Yeah. Part of the problem. I love that idea. Like I've never heard of that. I think that's really smart. This book, what do you want the main thing to be that people take away from your book?
So I come from a political, public policy, and then business background. So I was very like I want to be right, like a serious person. And that I always found that very limiting. So in this, I wrote a novel, and writing that novel freed me in a lot of ways. But one thing that I was very particular about as I wrote this was that I I obviously wrote this novel to make a point, a set of points. But that was not my purpose when writing. I wrote this to entertain. So the one thing I want people to come away from this novel with is like, that was fun. I can't believe I just read 320 pages that fast. When I take a break from the book, I'm thinking about it. That is my number one goal. That is what I hope. This in the end is art towards public service, and I want that art to stand. Beyond that, I really just hope people think. Like, I hope that some of their assumptions are challenged. I hope that part of this, or how some of the characters are represented, might piss them off. And if neither of those things happen, if they just read the book and they're nodding the entire time, I hope that they feel inspired and empowered to be able to go out and be part of creating new political alternatives that can be the solutions for the discontent we all feel right now.
Beautifully said, man. That is so good. Who's it for? Who's gonna who should pick this book up?
People with a pulse.
Good. Yes.
No,
Yes. Okay.
this is the other thing. It's like, I wrote this book in the end trying to just let me be me. I didn't want to try to be anything. I didn't want to try and write it in a certain way. So I did not write the book with a specific audience in mind. We will see who the audience ends up being. But I hope the audience is anybody who, one, likes being entertained, but two, when they look around, they're just like, I feel that things are broken. I don't feel good about reality right now. Maybe you are really anxious or really angry. Maybe you just have this sense of things being wrong and don't know what to do with it. I hope after reading the book, or I hope from an audience perspective, that people who feel that way can read the book and at the end of it go, oh, I understand, and I have a sense of what I might be able to do about it. And I'll also say this. I love Hunter S. Thompson. When I started trying to write a novel several years ago, I was like, I'm going to be Hunter S. Thompson, but maybe with a heart. The best feedback that I've gotten so far, it has been great because I've had, 30-year-old men who drink beer and all others have like really enjoyed reading this. But the folks who are somewhat obsessed with the novel in a way that's caught me off guard are, I'm going to call it, women over the age of 50 or 55. So I set out maybe trying to be Hunter S. Thompson, and I think I'm instead a poor man's version of Barbara Kingsolver. But grateful for that as well.
Well, you could always, go into the Danielle Steele era as well and just rock that. I mean, I don't know if there's any of the steamy stuff in there, but
There's
you
not.
could
And if anybody buys the book in the end, and people will, but I will just be so grateful. And it is such a treat to have anyone choose to read 90,000 words worth of something you wrote. So I approach all of this with a lot of humility in that sense.
That you are, Skot. You've always been so, just of our initial conversations, just so warm and open to converse and talk and to share ideas. And you just seem like a bright spot, that I hope people gravitate towards. I hope, and when reading the book, you're going to get some of that kind of idea out of this. I think that you're trying to be that here. And that's coming out of you through the book. So yeah, you're going to feel these different characters. You're going to know these characters because you probably either are one or somebody that is one of these characters. So it's very relatable. I mean, seriously, just the initial pages that, you'll start to go, oh yeah. Yeah. You start to connect. And so well done from the writing perspective, doing that. I appreciate you, man, for being on the show, and I appreciate your viewpoint. I appreciate you talking about something that is very important to all of us, that have a pulse, that we really need to be, talking and ruminating about these things and discussing them a bit more. So people can get the book now. Again, by the time this is out, it will be launched. And so people can get it on Amazon. Yeah. Anywhere else?
It's on Amazon. Book's website is loveisnottheanswernovel.com. It'll be available there as well.
Cool. Where do people connect with you? I mean, if they want to just kind of shoot the breeze with you, which you're very open to, I'm just going to say that because of the person you are. People just want to like talk to you and kind of share ideas, and like, where do people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on TikTok and Instagram. It's just at Skot Mackey Writer. And then my personal website is skotmackey.me. So skotmackey.me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I wish you all the best. Like, this is exciting for you. I just recently launched my own book. And I'm excited to see what you do with yours so that I can learn from my mistakes, but also see, that worked. That was great. So I'm excited for you and what you got going on here. So hopefully you make an impact and, keep doing the stuff you're doing, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm grateful for the opportunity, the platform, and how you show up in the world as well. You're very pleasant to be around, and that's because you try to see people in a really beautiful way. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Hopefully when my mom listens to this, she will feel proud. So appreciate you.
Moms feel proud. It's what they do.
That is what they do. So, all right, buddy. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Have a good one. Take care.
Have you lost just a bit of trust or faith in the system? The system that you feel is not serving you, that it's serving something else, it's self or the higher power or whatever it is out there. It can be discouraging, and it causes some contention, some different viewpoints, arguments, all kinds of things that can burden us all. And I love this idea of taking things personally and how that personal feeling that we have about ourselves is going to shape society. If we have an entire neighborhood, community of people that feel down on themselves, discouraged, hopeless, etc., that will reflect in society, which then reflects in politics. If, on the other hand, we have an optimistic, a feeling of appreciation, of love, of self-gratitude, of appreciation for who I am as an individual and what I bring to the table, if there's a bunch of people in the community feeling that way, it is going to reflect in society. And it is going to reflect then in politics. Part of the problem, I believe, is that we don't understand ourselves well enough, which is why, as a coach, I help people with that. I'm constantly working on myself and hopefully helping others in the process as well. We become what we fight. And that can be a good thing, that can be a not good thing, depending on what we're looking at. That's where it all happens. And this whole idea of love is power. Love is power. We can disagree and still like each other. Like that insight, we can say it easily, but is it true? Is it true for you? Is it true for me? Let's work on that. Let's work on that. If you want to find out more information about me or check out the show notes where there's going to be more information and links to the things referenced in this episode, visit skotwaldron.com. And lastly, I'm asking for a little bit of love, just a little bit. So please take a moment, follow, rate the show. The algorithms like that. It helps me get the word out. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And until next time, stay unlocked.